Good day, Industrial Advisor listeners, and thank you for tuning in. If you have not subscribed, please do so by clicking subscribe wherever you podcast. Click the like button and hit the bell if you want notifications of when we put up new content. Leave us a comment about anything we discuss here today or general comments about the show. Now, let's get into it.
Welcome to our Industrial Advisors podcast. I have Bill Condon and Matt McGregor. Today we're doing a 5-minute Friday on the state of the flex market, which is a pretty actually decent sized market for our area. But let's start with defining what flex is. So Matt, you want to define what flex is for us?
Flex industrial, I guess the way I've always designed it is obviously grade level. So you're driving in, no dock highs. And typically it's more incubator spaces. So call it 3,000 to 25,000 square feet on grade, clear height ranging from 14 to 18 feet. And typically it's a much higher office build out. So that's how I would define flex.
Yeah, typically you can be upwards of 50% built out, but 20 to 50 is kind of usually what you see in that flex range. So it's interesting when you look at the current vacancy and the activity over the years, like historically. I mean, it's ranged from, close to 18% back in, call it 2003, 2004, the vacancy rate back then, to, just under 6%, right, today. So big range. And, when you look at the historical vacancy, oftentimes you'll see the spike the times we've hit, an economic downturn. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's really interesting looking at this trend. Flex, as you know, seems to have the quickest reaction to the economy versus big box and other commercial assets. And I think it's because of the I don't want to call it instability, but those smaller tenants often have credit issues, or maybe I shouldn't say credit issues as much as they don't have the capacity to roll through changes in economic times. And so they're the quickest to close the doors or the quickest, to not have requirements. But it's interesting looking at the vacancy and, historically speaking, when vacancy is low, construction starts. And in the flex market, we have not seen a new building in our market constructed since 2008, Cedar River being the last one. And in that era, when you look at it, 2004, the vacancy had topped out near 18%. And that's when we started constructing, oddly enough, Walker Business Park, followed by Oakdale, and then finally Cedar River Corporate Park. By the time Cedar River was constructed, it had dipped below 8% before it started climbing again, obviously through the downturn. But currently, we're at the lowest mark we've been since 2000 at just about 5.9%. And no new construction, Bill. Why would that be?
So it's a couple things, right? So, the cost to build those buildings, smaller buildings, obviously is significantly higher on a price per square foot basis than it is to build bigger box. I think also as our markets become more institutional, those institutional groups don't want to build that. They don't want to manage 100 tenants. They don't want to manage 20 tenants. They want to go build the biggest building they can and lease it to, one tenant or a couple tenants. Certainly our market has seen a growth in tenants, right? Tenant size, tenant demand has also grown over the years. When you back up and you look at those flex projects though, the ones like Cedar River has performed extremely well. Walker has done as well. So, the quality flex projects that have been built have done extremely well. I think a big part of that is there's a flight to quality from some of those corporate type tenants in the flex markets, whereas some of the flex projects that have been, that are 30, 40 years old have struggled more. And those are typically parts that will take more risk on credit, because they're used to dealing with those type of tenants and they're willing to take that kind of risk. And it would make sense that the vacancy during the downturns impact this market more than others, because you alluded to it. Usually there's newer businesses, the credit risk is higher. And so those are the ones that are first impacted in a downturn.
Well, Bill, interesting that you say that they're doing well, and I don't necessarily disagree with you when you look at their vacancy of, and we're talking Class A flex. But here's a question that in preparing for this podcast, I was looking at going, what is happening throughout our career? Flex has always been the highest rate on the shell basis, right, of all industrial buildings. So small bay dock high, say 10 to 25,000 square foot spaces. And then you get into bigger box, obviously considerably cheaper than flex. This is the first time I think ever, even predating us, that, you know, dock high, larger spaces are seeing a larger shell rent than even class A flex. Why?
Yeah, the depth of tenants in that bigger size range is more, right? So there's more
Yep.
activity
More
there,
velocity.
more deal velocity there. So that's number one. The other thing that I think is we talked a little bit about this, right? The office build out and flex projects tends to be call it 20 to 50%, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, we all know that COVID impacted,
Work at home.
yeah, the whole the office environment, right? And
That's
there's a
right.
lot more folks doing the hybrid model. And so I think that's had an impact on deal velocity in the flex range with those spaces that have a higher build out.
That's a really good point, that that it is deal velocity and the combination of the office, because the lack of office need, I should say. Because when I think what drives rate on some of that big box stuff is when you have a vacancy, you often will have multiple toolers and maybe 2 to 4 people interested in taking down that space, where I feel like flex, you have a tour every now and then, and you're crossing your fingers that they like the space, right? Because it might be a few months before you get another tour. That's relevant. That's a credit tenant that you would actually want
Yeah.
in your park. So you don't have that 2 and 3 tenants that are all wanting the same space driving that rate up. And let's just briefly talk about rates. I think in looking at the comps, I think you're seeing a lot of class B flex still in that 80 to 90 range on shell rate. And you're seeing some of the class A stuff, dollar, maybe moving up to $1.20 on the shell, and then the office add on. But we're seeing big box in Kent up near that $1.20, right? So at the highest range of what flex is.
Yeah, for the newer big box
Yes.
product that's built in Kent, but I think
But even some of the older dock-high stuff, that's 25,000 feet, we're still seeing a $1.10, $1.15 on the shell.
yeah, yeah, and again, I think there's a bigger, there's more depth of tenants in that size range, so
Absolutely.
that's why they're able to do that. So what do you think? I mean, just wrapping this up, 2023, how do you think the flex market's going to hold up in 23?
Yeah, I think if we look back, if we think that we're going to be in a little bit more of challenge years for the next couple of years, as we have an election year coming up, we're seeing interest rates affected. I would guess that the industrial vacancy would go up a little bit with the still work at home philosophy. I don't think we're going to see big changes, but I could see maybe it reach, 6.5, 7% before it starts to compress again. And I would predict that we will see a new flex building, because the newest one is still built in 2008. So now that newest building is 15 years old. So I'm guessing, my prediction, in the next 18 months, we will see a new flex building somewhere in our market.
I don't know where it's going to go, so we'll see. We'll see about that. So thank you all for your time, and
Thanks a
appreciate you
lot.
listening to the 5 Minute Friday on Flex.
Have a great Friday.